Hi everyone, it's Karina Barley. It's great to be connecting with you again. It's been a few weeks, and tonight there is a face-to-face class. So we're at the 26th of April 2017. So you will have seen this PowerPoint before, but we're revisiting it again because of the upcoming assignment 2, and it's based on individual education plans, or they're also called individual student plans. You might hear them called lots of different things throughout your teaching journey, but we just wanted to revisit this a little bit. So I'm not going to go through the entire PowerPoint again, but just make some points throughout. So bear with me while I go to the actual PowerPoint. So we're going to be talking about individual education plans, as I said previously. I'm not going to go to all of these websites in this voiceover, but I would advise you to go to them and have a look at them. Lots of the government pages, and we're mostly referring to the Victorian government pages, but if you happen to be based out of New South Wales or Queensland or Western Australia or whatever state that you're based in, it's really worthwhile going to the government websites, because they really do have quite a lot of information now that's really beneficial to you as an educator, especially on things like support groups and individual education plans and differentiation and universal design for learning and all of that kind of thing. So it's worthwhile visiting your education department websites depending on what state you're in. And even if you're in Victoria, it's worthwhile looking at other states' websites as well, because, as I said, there's lots of information. I've actually found the Queensland government website and fantastic. There's lots of great information inside that website, so it's worthwhile looking at other states as well. So individual education planning. And again, I'm not going to go through all of these websites. Please do this in your own time, but it's worth looking at. So there's 5 integral components of education planning for students with learning needs, as outlined in the curriculum toolkit, and they are student-centred planning. This is very important. It needs to be based on what the student's needs, not what perhaps the classroom needs are. They can be completely different. We need to be embedding and referencing goals in the standard curriculum, so we need to be referring to curriculum to make sure that the goals match. Goals should be building blocks for quality classroom learning. What I find often with goals is that teachers write them at the as a mandatory thing, and then they sit on the desk and in a file, and they're perhaps not ever referred to. I believe that your goals should be organic and you should be referring to them often. And they shouldn't just be occurring in terms of you revisiting them once a term or even once a year. Sometimes I go to meetings and I hear teachers say, oh yes, we wrote goals at the beginning of the year and we're in perhaps October. Those goals will shift and change throughout the year. It's really important to make sure that they're organic. We need to be maximising human resources. So that means that we're using our goals to assist us in terms of how we can get the best out of our students, but also the best out of your teaching. And promoting positive behaviour support in schools. Some goals are not always academic, they can also be behavioural. So what is an IEP? An IEP is a working document designed by teachers with key stakeholders. So that could be families, psychologists, speech pathologists, occupational therapists, and there often are other therapists involved as well. And these goals should inform the planning, delivery, and evaluation of an education program. It is a teaching tool to deliver targeted educational programming to achieve appropriate learning outcomes for identified students with specific needs, and is developed through a collaborative process. So that means that everybody has a part to play in it. I often feel that, not for all students, but for some students, it's important to have them involved in the process as well. An individual learning plan or individual education plan can be described as the aggregation of the planning, the processes, and the products relating to the high priority learning needs of a student with additional learning requirements. So an IEP should identify a student's individual needs and priorities for learning, outlines both short and long-term educational goals and the actions, strategies, modifications, and adaptations that will be taken to achieve them, is a flexible living document that is reviewed and modified over time. And that's what I said before about the document should be organic, should always be moving. Assigns responsibility and accountability for implementing and evaluating the plan, and provides an ongoing record to ensure continuity of learning. So why have an IEP? The development of an IEP is essential for addressing the needs of students who require additional support or an alternative or modified program, environment, or curriculum. I think it also brings accountability back to the teacher and also the school. So it also kind of makes everybody accountable, honestly. But oftentimes what I do see in classrooms is that the learning is deferred to the teacher aide or the support person involved with the student who has additional needs. And I think the IEP brings that responsibility back to the educator, which I think is important. This ensures schools fulfil their obligations in terms of departmental requirements and accountability. You need to know that deferring your role to a teacher aide is not doing your role. You must be in charge of the curriculum of that particular student, in fact all of your students, but specifically for the student with additional needs, because you need to be guiding that program and guiding what occurs in terms of their learning. It also, though, provides support for the school and classroom teacher in developing a meaningful teaching and learning program for individual students. So what does that mean? It can help you to know whether your goals are working or not, and sometimes they don't. You can create goals with good purpose, good intention in mind, but they can often fall flat. But that should guide us rather than us feeling like we've failed. It's okay, that didn't work. How else could we make that goal work, or should we revisit the goal and make it a different goal? Promotes a collaborative process that has all team members involved working towards agreed goals and interventions. I think this is really important, and I don't think we involve the parents enough, because I believe the parent should be part of the writing process. And oftentimes what happens is that you'll have a student support meeting where parents are invited and goals are presented, and then parents jump on board and say, oh yes, okay, I'm going to sign that off, without having any real input into what those goals are. So it's important to embrace your parents, because parents are your biggest informants in terms of that student. They do know what their child is capable of. Maybe not so much educationally, but they at least have some great awareness that we should embrace and should take on board. It assists schools to determine required resources. So what are we going to need to be able to support our students that need it? And provides a vehicle for sharing information. IEPs for students with additional needs. So who might they be? Honestly, it could be a student with ADHD, it could be a student with autism, it could be a student who has hearing or sight issues, it could also be a student who has physical issues. Students don't necessarily need to be funded to need an IEP. So please bear that in mind as well. I think it's a great tool for any student. Of course, it's going to be difficult to perhaps create an IEP for 24 students, but we could create them for those targeted students that we need to add additional supports to. And also think about your gifted students. An IEP could be really valuable for them as well. IEPs will reflect the high priority learning needs of a student. It will not be a grocery list of all the things that a student needs to learn in a given period. And it should be focusing on what they can do rather than what they can't do. It will not include goals in all learning areas. It will not cover total curriculum needs of the student. It will not be a document which covers everything a student does at school, and will not be developed by the school teacher for the parents. As I said before, it needs to be a collaborative process. So what might you include in your IEP template? So there are a couple of templates on the education sites, and again, please go look at other sites as well, because I actually looked at the Queensland site, as I said before, and I found theirs really worthwhile looking into. I'm not going to labour on the templates. I think it's important for you to have a look at them and get an idea of how you might create them. So short-term goals should be SMART goals. I think this is the most important thing to be considering. Goals should be specific, so they should describe an overt skill or behaviour relating to a particular skill or ability, not a generalised broad statement. I've seen goals that say things like, the student will behave when they're outside in the playground. What does that even mean? And what is that targeting? It's very broad, it's very generalised, and it's not relating to specific behaviour. They should be measurable, so we should be able to tell whether that goal can be achieved. So I've seen goals where the student will be engaged and motivated. I don't know how you would measure that. So it's more important to have goals that are measurable in terms of we can see whether there's been an improvement or there's been some ground made. They should be achievable. We should not be making goals that are impossible. So one goals that I've seen again is in relation to a student who has autism. The student will no longer stim in the classroom. Stimming is a behaviour that is often needed for students who have autism. So requesting them not to do that is an impossible goal to achieve. They're realistic, so we need to be consider, how realistic are the goals, and can they be achieved? Is it realistic to expect? So, for example, if a student doesn't know all of their times table, it would be unrealistic to expect them to know all of them within within the first couple of terms. We need to be realistic about what they can achieve. And they're timely and time bound. So it's important to consider the time frame. So if you're working on goals that for a term, what can be achieved within that term? So they might learn the 1 or 2 times table in a term. So goals should have content similar to those for age peers, encourage active participation with others, be individualised, be based on strengths, and be functional, be meaningful, be realistic and achievable, be measurable, and describe the expected learning outcomes. And these are all things that we've just talked about. Goals should be set that describe the student's actual performance to show successful achievement of the goal and enable the school to effectively report the progress. So, for example, let's say if we're asking them to learn their times table, so the end result might be that they're able to recite the times table to you, or they're able to write it. Some students who are non-verbal or a little bit shy might be better off writing it. You might be also using technology, so they might not be able to write it necessarily, but they can use a specific app that demonstrates that they know their times tables really well. So we also can think about short-term goals, and when we're doing that, we need to think of what's called ABCD. So the audience, who is this aimed at? So of course we're looking at the student. The behaviour, what are we expecting our students to do? The condition, under what circumstances should that learning occur? So are we talking about a classroom educational activity, or are we talking about a social skill? Because remember, goals can also relate to social skills. And finally, to what degree? So sometimes we can say that the student does a particular, I'm trying to think of an example. So let's say that we can go back to the times table example. So they may not be able to do their times table 100% of the time, but they may be able to achieve that 80% of the time. And that can be a realistic criterion to set for them, because otherwise we might be making it too difficult. It's important to also know the entry skill. There's no point having the times table as a entry skill if they already know the 1 or 2 times table. So we need to know we need to be aware of what they know first of all. So each short-term goal should have, as I just said, an entry skill. The entry skill is an explicit description of the student's current performance before the instruction commences. And this will enable teachers to evaluate the student's level of achievement in relation to the goal. So if they don't know their times tables at all and they achieve the first or the second times table, then we can measure how much they've learned in a period of time. The entry skill must be progressive over the years so that parents can see some change and the initial goal is being achieved. So here's some examples. I'm just going to flick through this. So in February, the entry skill will be retained from the last ILP from the previous year. For example, Sam is disengaged when writing and unwilling to try at all. In April, Sam is beginning to attempt words using initial letters with TCH support 50% of the time. In July, Sam is writing 1 or 2 high-frequency words and attempting others using initial and final sounds with teacher support every lesson. And in September, Sam is writing 1 sentence with support 50% of the time. And you can see that those percentages are really important because we don't want to measure it at 100% because 50% for this particular student who started with being disengaged and not willing to write is quite an achievement. Monitoring, assessment and reporting procedures. So these come with the things that you probably will already know. So observations, anecdotal records, checklists, oral presentations, SSG feedback, so student support group meeting feedback, formal reporting systems, parent-teacher interviews, running records, interviews, work samples and self-evaluations. And I think there's a couple of things missing, and technology is now a huge component, especially for students with diverse needs. So there's lots of different programs now where students can use technology to demonstrate their learning. Now that could be via an app, or it could be via a screencasting app, it could be via video. So we do need to consider technology when we are considering assessment and reporting procedures as well. So developing short-term goals. Again, I'm not going to go through these. I think it's important for you to now go away and to have a think about this for yourself. There's an activity here inside the PowerPoint that asks you to consider, you read the goal and identify the goals with an objective, measurable component that makes it clear what performance is required to indicate successful achievement. So do you think these are observable and measurable? And so have a think about that for yourself. Then there's also some activities about looking at your own long-term goals and experimenting with writing long-term goals for your students. This does require a bit of an art, I have to tell you. So it's important to start writing them now and thinking about them now, and then have a look at and see if you can find any that are on the internet and compare them to what you've written. And then also go back to the SMART checklist and see if your goals meet that criteria. Then look at intermediate goals and then back to short-term goals. So I'm not going to go through the rest of this PowerPoint. I really urge you again to please look at Vel's look at the different websites that are on this PowerPoint. It's incredibly valuable information. And for example, this one here is an old document, but it's lots of really important hints to be aware of. And again, there's more information here. So I hope this has helped you a little bit to understand what an IEP is in a little bit more depth. And for those of you attending tonight, I will see you there tonight. And I'll be putting the other PowerPoint up later on today. Have a great day, and I'll see you all soon.